The hardest thing about betrayal is not always the moment someone leaves. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing they had been ashamed of you long before they ever walked out the door. Marcus Hale learned that lesson on a cold Friday morning in Chicago, standing in the polished marble lobby of Whitmore and Crane Technologies, watching his wife walk beside another man as if Marcus were no longer a husband, no longer a man, no longer even a person worth explaining things to. And the man beside her was not just anyone. It was Richard Whitmore, his boss, the same man who had shaken Marcus's hand at company dinners, praised his work in board meetings, smiled at his wife with polite interest, and called Marcus one of the good ones when he thought the compliment sounded generous. Marcus had always hated that phrase, one of the good ones, as if kindness, intelligence, discipline, and dignity were exceptions when they came in a black man's body. But Marcus had swallowed many insults in his life. He had learned early that in certain rooms, anger made people afraid and fear made them dangerous. So he became measured, careful, excellent. He wore tailored suits, kept his voice even, arrived earlier than everyone else, and left later than most. He believed excellence would protect him. He was wrong. Just before we get into it, I want to know where you're watching from today. And if stories about justice, second chances, and people finally getting what they deserve speak to you, make sure you stay until the end. Marcus had not been born into rooms with marble floors and glass walls. He was born on the south side, in a narrow brick apartment above a laundromat where the dryers shook the floor at night, and the smell of detergent lived permanently in the curtains. His mother, Evelyn Hale, worked double shifts as a nurse's assistant, and his father, Samuel, drove city buses until his knees gave out and pain settled into his joints like an unwanted tenant. They did not have much money, but they had rules. Look people in the eye. Keep your word. Never let anyone make you small just because they are uncomfortable with your size. Marcus carried those rules with him like scripture. He earned scholarships, studied software engineering, built systems for companies that never bothered to learn how to pronounce his name correctly, and eventually landed at Whitmore and Crane, a mid-sized technology firm that specialized in logistics software for hospitals, emergency response systems, and government contractors. At first, Marcus thought he had finally found his place. He was hired as a senior engineer, but within 3 years he was designing infrastructure that kept entire contracts alive. When systems failed at midnight, they called Marcus. When clients threatened to walk, they put Marcus on the call. When Richard Whitmore needed someone to stand behind the curtain and make his presentations look brilliant, he handed Marcus the broken pieces and expected miracles. Marcus gave him miracles, quietly, professionally, repeatedly. And every time Richard took the applause, Marcus told himself that work spoke eventually. But work did not speak in rooms where certain people had already decided who was allowed to be heard. Richard Whitmore was everything the business magazines liked to photograph. Silver-haired before 50, sharp blue eyes, expensive watches, and a voice that could make ordinary sentences sound like strategy. He had inherited money, multiplied it well enough to call himself self-made, and built his leadership style around charm in public and pressure in private. He was not openly cruel, not in the way people could easily report. His cruelty was polished. It came in jokes that left no fingerprints. It came in being introduced as our diversity success story at a client dinner. It came in Richard placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder and saying, "You're surprisingly articulate when you're under pressure," as if Marcus should accept the words like a medal. It came in meetings where Marcus would present a solution, the room would go silent, and then 10 minutes later a white colleague would repeat the same idea and receive enthusiastic agreement. The first time it happened, Marcus thought it was coincidence. The 10th time, he knew it was culture. His wife, Claire, told him not to be so sensitive. Claire Hale had been Claire Bennett before she married him, a woman from a wealthy suburb with pale blonde hair, delicate wrists, and a smile that changed depending on who was watching. When they first met at a charity technology event, she seemed different from the people Marcus had learned to guard himself around. She asked real questions. She laughed at his dry humor. She told him she admired how focused he was. She said she did not care what anyone thought. Marcus believed her because he wanted to, Love makes people generous with evidence. In the beginning, Claire was proud to be seen with him, or at least she seemed proud. She liked the story of them, the handsome black engineer from a working-class family, and the elegant woman who had chosen love over old-fashioned expectations. She told that story at dinner parties with one hand on Marcus's arm, and people praised her open-mindedness as if marrying him had been an act of public service. Marcus noticed. He noticed the way Claire's friends asked if his parents were still together, as if stability in a black family required verification. He noticed the way her father, Thomas Bennett, shook his hand too firmly and later asked what sport Marcus had played in college, even after Marcus had already explained his academic scholarship. He noticed the way her mother, Margaret, once said, after 2 glasses of wine, "Your children would be so exotic," and Claire laughed awkwardly instead of correcting her. Marcus noticed all of it, but he kept loving Claire because he thought love could educate people if given enough time. That was another thing he was wrong about. Over the years, Claire changed, or maybe she only stopped pretending. She began correcting Marcus in public, not for mistakes, but for tone. "Don't sound so intense," she would whisper after he disagreed with someone at dinner. "You know how people take that." When he wore hoodies at home, she said he looked intimidating if delivery people came by. When he grew his beard fuller, she suggested he keep it cleaner for work. When he talked about racism at the office, she became tired. "Maybe Richard is just demanding," she said. "Not everything is about race." Marcus asked her once quietly, "When would you believe that it is?" She did not answer. The affair began before Marcus knew it had begun, but after his heart already sensed the shape of it. Claire started visiting the office more often under small excuses, dropping off lunch, meeting Marcus for coffee, attending company events she had once found boring. Richard was always attentive when she came, always charming, always making jokes that made her touch his arm when she laughed. Marcus saw it and hated himself for seeing it because jealousy felt too small a word for what was happening. It was not only that Richard wanted his wife, it was that Richard enjoyed wanting something that belonged to Marcus. There was a kind of conquest in the way he looked at her, a quiet message delivered across conference rooms and cocktail receptions. "You may build the thing, Marcus, but men like me still take what we want." The Friday morning everything broke began with rain. Marcus had arrived early, as he always did, carrying a laptop bag and a folder of final architecture notes for the largest contract Whitmore and Crane had ever pursued. The contract was with North Star Medical Systems, a national hospital network seeking a full logistics and emergency response platform. Marcus had designed the core engine himself after months of unpaid late nights, missed dinners, and weekends. Claire said proved he cared more about work than marriage. The irony of that would stay with him later. He walked into the lobby and immediately saw people gathered near the elevators. Not a crowd exactly, but a cluster of employees pretending not to stare at something worth staring at. Then he saw Claire. She stood near the security desk wearing a cream coat he had bought her for their anniversary. Beside her stood Richard, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back. It was not a professional touch. It was not accidental. It was ownership. Marcus stopped walking. Claire saw him, and for one brief second, guilt passed over her face. Not grief, not love, guilt. Then Richard turned, and his expression settled into something almost kind. That was the worst part. He looked prepared. "Marcus," Richard said, as if greeting him at a scheduled appointment, "I think we should talk upstairs." Marcus looked at Claire. "Is this what I think it is?" Claire folded her arms. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady in a way that told Marcus she had rehearsed. "I'm leaving, Marcus." The lobby became silent around them, though nobody admitted they were listening. Marcus felt the weight of every hidden glance. Receptionists, analysts, junior engineers, security guards, people who had watched him carry the company's hardest problems on his back and were now watching his private humiliation unfold like office gossip. "With him?" Marcus asked. Claire's mouth tightened. "It's not that simple." Richard sighed softly, a performance of patience. "Marcus, I know this is painful. But Claire deserves a life where she doesn't have to constantly struggle through your resentment. Marcus slowly turned his eyes to Richard. My resentment? Your anger, Richard corrected gently. Your suspicion, the feeling that everyone is against you. Claire looked down. Marcus understood then that Richard had not only taken his wife, he had given her language to reinterpret Marcus's pain as a flaw. Every time Marcus came home exhausted from being talked over, every time he described a slight she did not want to see, every time he asked her to stand beside him, Richard had been there offering a cleaner version of reality. Marcus was not wounded. Marcus was bitter. Marcus was not fighting prejudice. Marcus was imagining it. Marcus was not tired from carrying invisible weight. Marcus was angry because anger was simply what people expected from men like him. Claire, Marcus said, and his voice was quieter than he expected. Tell me this is not how you want to do this. She finally looked at him. I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of feeling like I have to apologize for my world. Richard understands me. Something inside Marcus went very still. Your world, he repeated. She flinched because she heard it too late. Richard stepped forward slightly. Maybe you should take the day. We'll handle the North Star presentation. Marcus looked at him then. Really looked. The calm smile, the expensive suit, the hand still hovering too close to Claire's back, and behind that, the cold calculation of a man who believed the game was already won. Marcus had built the North Star system. Marcus had written the architecture. Marcus knew the vulnerabilities, the failover logic, the predictive routing model, the hospital capacity algorithm. Without him, the presentation would be a beautiful shell with nothing living inside it. Richard knew that too, but he believed Marcus would not fight. Men like Richard always believed that dignity meant weakness when it came from someone they were used to underestimating. No, Marcus said. Richard blinked. Excuse me? I'm not taking the day. I have a presentation. Claire stared at him, shocked that he was not collapsing in the approved way. Richard's smile thinned. Given the circumstances, I don't think that's appropriate. Given the circumstances, Marcus said, I think it's very appropriate that I finish what I built. For a moment, Richard's mask slipped. Not fully, but enough. His eyes hardened. Careful, Marcus. There it was, the warning beneath every polished insult. Careful. Not because Marcus was wrong, but because there were consequences for standing upright. Marcus looked around the lobby at the people pretending not to watch. He adjusted the strap of his laptop bag. I've been careful my whole life, he said. Today I'm going to be correct. Then he walked past them to the elevator. The North Star presentation began at 10. By 9:45, Richard had tried twice to remove Marcus from the meeting, first through HR by suggesting emotional conflict, then through Greg Lawson, the white project director who had spent 6 months taking credit for Marcus's progress reports, while privately asking him to simplify technical explanations so the leadership team would not feel outpaced. But the North Star executives had requested Marcus by name after hearing him solve a major integration concern on a previous call. Richard could not exclude him without raising questions, so Marcus sat at the far end of the conference table while Richard stood at the front, smiling like nothing had happened. Claire was gone by then. Her absence sat in the room with Marcus anyway. Richard opened with confidence. He spoke about innovation, trust, transformation, strategic partnership. He clicked through slides Marcus had prepared, using phrases Marcus had written, pausing at all the right moments. The North Star executives nodded politely. Then came the technical section. Richard gestured toward Greg. Greg stood and began explaining the predictive emergency routing system. Within 3 minutes, Marcus knew he did not understand it. Within 5, the North Star CTO knew too. She was a sharp-faced white woman named Elaine Porter, and her expression changed from polite interest to concern, as Greg described the platform as if it were a scheduling tool with a few advanced features. I'm sorry, Elaine interrupted. How does the system respond when ambulance diversion conflicts with real-time ICU bed availability across multiple facilities? Greg smiled. The platform uses adaptive routing. That doesn't answer the question. Richard stepped in smoothly. Elaine, the details are flexible depending on implementation. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. Flexible was what executives said when they did not know the answer. Elaine turned her gaze to Marcus. Mr. Hale, you handled this concern on our last technical call. Can you clarify? The room shifted. Richard's jaw tightened. Greg looked down. Marcus stood slowly. He did not rush. He connected his laptop, opened the live simulation environment, and began speaking. Not loudly, not defensively, just clearly. He explained how the model weighted ambulance location, hospital capacity, available specialists, blood supply levels, trauma unit status, and emergency room saturation in real time. He showed how the algorithm adjusted when a facility went offline. He demonstrated a simulated multi-vehicle accident on the expressway and how the system rerouted patients based on survival probability rather than administrative convenience. The room changed as he spoke. People leaned forward. Elaine stopped taking notes and simply watched. A North Star board member whispered something to another executive. Marcus felt Richard behind him, silent and burning. And for 20 minutes, the truth was visible. The system worked because Marcus had built it. The contract was possible because Marcus understood it. The future Richard had planned to sell belonged to the man he had tried to humiliate that morning. When Marcus finished, Elaine Porter sat back and said, "That is the platform we came here to see." Richard smiled quickly. "Exactly. Marcus has been a valuable contributor under our leadership." Marcus unplugged his laptop. Contributor. Under our leadership. The words landed, but they no longer entered him. Something had shifted. Pain was still there, but beneath it was a cleaner force, not rage, decision. The contract did not close that day. North Star requested additional review and postponed signing. Richard blamed Marcus privately before the elevator doors had fully closed. "You embarrassed Greg in front of the client." Marcus looked at him. Greg embarrassed Greg. Richard stepped closer. "You think because you had one good moment in there, you're untouchable." "No," Marcus said. "I think because I built the core platform, I'm necessary." Richard smiled then, and this smile had no charm in it at all. "Everyone is replaceable." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's what men like you tell yourselves right before you find out who is holding the structure up." By Monday morning, Marcus was placed on administrative leave pending a review of his conduct and professionalism. By Wednesday, someone leaked to the company that Marcus had become unstable after marital issues. By Friday, HR presented him with a separation agreement and a non-disparagement clause thick enough to bury the truth. Richard did not attend the meeting. He did not need to. His fingerprints were never on the knife when someone else could hold it. The HR director, a nervous white woman named Allison, slid the papers across the table and avoided Marcus's eyes. "This is a generous package," she said. Marcus looked at the number. It was not generous. It was hush money priced by people who thought his silence would come cheap. "And if I don't sign?" Allison swallowed. "The company may proceed with termination for cause." Marcus almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the machinery was so familiar. First they question your attitude, then they question your stability, then they question your integrity. And if you still refuse to bend, they document your removal as if the paper itself can turn injustice into procedure. Marcus pushed the papers back. "No." Allison looked startled. "Marcus, I really think you should speak with an attorney before making an emotional decision." "This is not emotional," he said. "That's why it scares you." He walked out with a cardboard box containing 8 years of desk objects, 3 notebooks, a framed photo of his parents, and a small wooden pencil holder Claire had given him before she learned to be embarrassed by the life they were building. Downstairs, rain streaked the lobby windows. The same security guard who had watched his humiliation a week earlier gave him a quiet nod. Marcus nodded back. He stepped outside unemployed, publicly shamed, and abandoned by the woman he had promised to love. For 3 days, he barely slept. The apartment felt haunted by Claire's absence, though she had taken surprisingly little. Clothes, jewelry, her favorite coffee machine, wedding photos from the hallway, not because she wanted them, Marcus suspected, but because she did not want him to have them. On the fourth day, her attorney sent divorce papers. On the fifth, Richard moved her into a lakefront condo owned through one of his family trusts. Marcus learned that from a mutual acquaintance who delivered the news with the clumsy pity of someone who enjoyed being first to know. "I'm sorry, man," he said. "That's cold." Cold was not the word. Cold suggested nature. This was choice. Marcus signed nothing immediately. He hired an attorney he could barely afford, stopped answering calls from former colleagues, and spent long nights reading through his own records. He had always documented everything, not because he expected betrayal, but because he believed good engineering required proof. Emails, time-stamped development logs, architecture drafts, meeting notes, messages from Richard praising his work when praise was useful, comments from Greg asking Marcus to clean up code Greg later claimed to have supervised. The more Marcus gathered, the more the shape of the theft became clear. Whitmore and Crane had not merely pushed him out, they were preparing to claim ownership of the platform's most original elements while naming Richard and Greg as the strategic leads. North Star would sign eventually if the system held. But Marcus knew something Richard did not. The platform was unfinished in ways only its architect understood. The public demo worked. The controlled simulations worked. But the full hospital integration required a stabilization layer Marcus had not yet deployed. Without it, the system would degrade under real emergency load within months, not fail dramatically, worse, fail selectively. Enough to create errors nobody could explain quickly, enough to cost lives if deployed carelessly. Marcus had warned Richard about this 3 times. Richard had ignored him twice and told him once not to overcomplicate the sales cycle. That was the difference between building technology and selling it. Sales wanted the promise to be true by contract date. Engineering knew promises did not care about deadlines. 2 weeks after Marcus left, Elaine Porter called him directly. He almost did not answer. When he did, her voice was careful. "Mr. Hale, I hope I'm not crossing a line." "That depends on the line." "Whitmore and Crane told us you were no longer associated with the project." "That's true." A pause. "They also told us your contribution was limited to early-stage architecture." Marcus looked at the development logs open on his kitchen table. "That is not true." Elaine was silent for a moment. "I suspected as much." Marcus said nothing. She continued. "I can't discuss procurement details, but I will say this. We are delaying final execution until we understand who actually built what. Off the record, if this platform cannot be safely implemented without you, I need to know." Marcus closed his eyes. This was the moment men like Richard counted on never happening. The moment someone asked the person who had been erased to speak. "Off the record," Marcus said, "it cannot be safely implemented without the stabilization layer I designed, and they do not have it." Elaine exhaled softly. "Do you have documentation?" Marcus looked at the folders, the logs, the notes, the years of invisible labor made visible by his refusal to trust memory alone. "Yes," he said, "I have everything." That call did not save him immediately. Life is rarely that generous. The divorce was brutal. Claire's attorney painted Marcus as emotionally distant, work-obsessed, resentful, and difficult. Claire sat across from him in mediation, wearing pearl earrings and a soft gray dress, looking like the victim of a storm rather than one of the people who had caused it. She asked for the apartment, half his retirement, and spousal support until she reestablished her lifestyle. Marcus stared at her when he heard that phrase. Her lifestyle. The life he had helped pay for while she apologized for him in rooms where he was the only person with enough grace not to embarrass her. During a break, she found him near the courthouse windows. For a moment, she looked like the woman he had loved before contempt made a home in her mouth. "Marcus, she said quietly. You should settle. Fighting makes you look bitter. He looked at her for a long time. There it is again. What? That word people use when they don't want to talk about what they did. Her face hardened. You always do this. No, he said. I always survived it. There's a difference. She crossed her arms. Richard says you're destroying your own reputation. Marcus smiled faintly. Richard should worry about his company. Her eyes flickered, small, fast, but enough. What does that mean? It means I'm done explaining warnings to people who only hear arrogance when I speak. He walked away before she could answer. The next year was a season of reduction. Marcus sold the apartment and moved into a smaller place near Bronzeville. He gave up restaurants, vacations, new suits, and every version of comfort that was not necessary. Former colleagues avoided him. Industry recruiters stopped replying after initial interest mysteriously cooled. Richard's version of events traveled quietly through professional networks. Difficult, angry, brilliant maybe, but not a team player. Marcus knew the code. Black excellence was admired until it demanded ownership. Black confidence was impressive until it refused to be grateful. Black pain was inconvenient unless it could be turned into a diversity panel. But Marcus did not disappear. He built. At first, he took contract work under an LLC called Hale Systems, fixing back-end failures for small clinics, nonprofit networks, and regional emergency services that could not afford the big firms. He charged less than he should have and worked more than was healthy. His first office was his kitchen table. His first employee was himself. His first investor was a credit card he prayed over every month. But his work did what truth often does when given time. It spread through results. A clinic director in Milwaukee recommended him to a hospital in Detroit. Detroit recommended him to a trauma network in St. Louis. St. Louis led to a state emergency response pilot. Marcus hired 2 engineers, both overlooked in ways he recognized instantly. One was an older white woman named Diane who had been pushed out of corporate tech after cancer treatment made her less scalable. The other was a young white developer named Owen who had dropped out of college to care for his disabled brother and could code circles around graduates from schools that would never interview him. Marcus did not hire them because they were overlooked. He hired them because they were excellent. But he understood what it meant to have excellence ignored because the package did not match the room's expectations. Hale Systems grew slowly, then suddenly. Their software was not flashy. It was stable. In emergencies, stable mattered more than beautiful. Marcus built the stabilization layer Richard had dismissed and improved it until it became the backbone of a new platform called PulseRoute. It did what the old Whitmore and Crane system had promised to do, but safely, transparently, and with audit trails that hospitals could actually trust. 2 years after Marcus walked out of Whitmore and Crane with a cardboard box, PulseRoute won its first state contract. 3 years after, it operated across 37 hospitals. 4 years after, Hale Systems moved into a real office with exposed brick, too much sunlight, and a coffee machine Marcus bought. Not because they needed it, but because he remembered what it felt like when small comforts belonged to other people. He kept his father's photo on his desk. His mother cried the first time she visited the office. "You built this?" she asked, walking slowly between rows of desks where engineers looked up and greeted Marcus with genuine respect. "We built it," Marcus said. She touched his cheek the way she had when he was a boy. "No, baby. You built the door. Other people walked through because you opened it." During those years, he heard about Claire and Richard in fragments. They married 18 months after the divorce. The wedding appeared in a lifestyle magazine under a headline about elegance and second chances. Marcus did not read the article, but someone sent it anyway. Claire looked beautiful in the photos. Richard looked victorious. Whitmore and Crane secured the North Star contract after months of delay, but implementation problems began quietly. Missed integration deadlines, data inconsistencies, hospital complaints. Richard blamed vendors, clients, and market complexity. He always had language ready. But language could not patch bad architecture. North Star eventually withdrew from full expansion and entered arbitration. Other clients followed. The company's stock slid. Then came an investigation after a routing failure during a regional emergency exposed internal misrepresentations about system readiness. No patients died, thank God, but several ambulances were delayed, and that was enough. The press began asking questions. Engineers began leaving. Investors began circling. Marcus watched from a distance, not with joy exactly. He had learned that revenge is a meal that often poisons the person eating it. But he did feel something when Whitmore and Crane's name crossed his screen beside words like mismanagement, inflated claims, and leadership failure. He felt the quiet confirmation of gravity. Things built on theft eventually leaned toward collapse. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 5 years after Claire left him in the lobby. Marcus was in a conference room reviewing a new deployment map when his assistant said Elaine Porter was on the line. Elaine had become CEO of North Star Medical Systems by then, and she spoke to Marcus with the direct warmth of someone who had never forgotten what he told her when telling the truth cost him something. "Marcus," she said, "are you sitting down?" "That depends. Is this good news or expensive news?" "Both, possibly." He smiled. "Go ahead." "Whitmore and Crane is looking for a buyer." Marcus said nothing. Diane, sitting across the table, looked up from her laptop. Elaine continued. "Quietly for now. Their debt structure is ugly, the lawsuits are worse, and their board wants a clean exit before regulators finish turning over stones. Several firms are interested in the client list and government contracts, but there's concern about legacy liabilities." Marcus leaned back. Through the glass wall of the conference room, he could see his employees working, laughing, arguing over code, living inside something he had built from the ashes of what Richard tried to take. "Why are you telling me?" Elaine's voice softened slightly. "Because if anyone should decide what happens to that company, it's the man who kept it alive before they threw him out." Marcus looked down at his hands. For a moment, he was back in that lobby, rain on the windows, Claire in the cream coat, Richard's hand at her back. Careful, Marcus. He had been careful, then he had been correct. "Send me what you have," Marcus said. The acquisition process took 4 months. It was complicated, hostile, and almost derailed twice. Richard tried to block it when he learned Hale Systems was the leading bidder. He argued that Marcus had a conflict of interest. He claimed personal animus. He told the board that selling to Marcus would be humiliating. That, more than anything, convinced them to proceed. Humiliation was not a legal argument. It was a confession of ego. Claire called Marcus for the first time in years, 3 days before the final vote. He recognized the number and considered letting it ring. Then he answered. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. "Marcus," she said finally. Her voice was older, not by much, but enough. "Claire," she inhaled shakily. "I heard what's happening. A lot is happening. Are you really buying the company?" Marcus looked out his office window. Chicago moved below him in silver light. "Yes." Silence. Then softly, "Why?" He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because it's worth saving. After what they did to you. The people who work there are not all Richard. The clients are not Richard. The systems still support hospitals, emergency networks, real people. I know exactly what happens when leadership treats technology like a trophy instead of a responsibility." Claire was quiet. Then she said, "Was it about punishing him?" Marcus thought carefully before answering, "No, but I won't pretend consequences are punishment just because they finally reached the right person." Her breath caught. "He told me you would destroy us if you ever had the chance. He was wrong." "Was he?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. There was a time when he would have wanted this conversation to heal something. Now he only wanted it to be honest. "Claire, you left me in a lobby with the man who had been undermining me for years. You let him call my pain anger because it made your choices easier to live with. You watched people treat me like I was less than I was, and when I asked you to see it, you chose the comfort of not seeing. I don't need to destroy you. What you chose already did damage I could never improve on." She began to cry then, quietly. Marcus did not comfort her. That was not cruelty. It was boundaries arriving late but firm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," Marcus said. "It doesn't." "I was ashamed of how people looked at us," she admitted. "Not at first, or maybe at first, and I lied to myself. My parents, my friends, Richard, the comments, the little jokes. I kept telling myself I was tired of fighting the world, but the truth is you were the one fighting. I was just tired of standing close enough to be uncomfortable." Marcus opened his eyes. The city blurred slightly, and he hated that some part of him still hurt for the younger version of himself who had needed to hear those words. "Thank you for saying that." "Can you forgive me?" she asked. Marcus was silent for a long time. "Someday, maybe, but forgiveness is not a door back into my life." She cried harder then, but Marcus had nothing more to give. When the call ended, he sat quietly for several minutes, not because he missed her, but because grief sometimes returns wearing old clothes. The final board meeting took place on a rainy morning almost exactly 5 years after the lobby. Marcus noticed that as his car pulled up to Whitmore and Crane's headquarters, the same marble, the same glass, the same security desk. But this time when he entered, people did not pretend not to see him. They looked openly, some with surprise, some with shame, some with relief. A few former colleagues still worked there, older now, their faces carrying the discomfort of people who remembered what they had stayed silent through. Marcus walked past them without slowing. In the boardroom, Richard Whitmore stood near the windows, looking thinner than Marcus remembered. His silver hair was still perfect. His suit was still expensive. But the confidence had drained from him in a way tailoring could not hide. Claire was not there. Marcus was grateful for that. The board members sat in tense silence as Marcus entered with his legal team and Diane beside him as chief operating officer. Richard's eyes locked on Marcus. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Richard smiled, or tried to. "Marcus." "Richard. I suppose you've been waiting a long time for this." Marcus set his folder on the table. "Not as long as you think." Richard's expression tightened. "You know, whatever story you've told yourself, you were not pushed out because of race." The room went still. There it was, exposed at last. The old defense, pulled from the oldest drawer. Marcus looked at him calmly. "I was pushed out because you believed a black man's work could belong to you if you made him look difficult enough." Richard's face flushed. "That's absurd." "No," Marcus said. "Absurd was calling me aggressive when I disagreed with bad decisions. Absurd was calling me articulate like I should be grateful my sentences surprised you. Absurd was taking my architecture, removing my name, and then acting shocked when the system failed without the person who understood it." One of the board members looked down. Richard's jaw worked. "You always had a chip on your shoulder." Marcus nodded once, slowly. "And you always mistook my memory for resentment." The vote was procedural. The acquisition had already been negotiated, approved by creditors, and cleared by regulators. Hale Systems would purchase Whitmore and Crane's core assets, assume selected contracts, retain most employees under restructured leadership, and cooperate with ongoing investigations into executive misconduct. Richard would resign immediately. Greg Lawson would be terminated. Several internal reviews would be reopened. Marcus had insisted on one additional condition, a public correction naming him as the principal architect of the original North Star platform and acknowledging that prior internal descriptions of his role had been inaccurate. The company's counsel resisted. Marcus did not move. The correction stayed. After the documents were signed, Richard remained seated as others left the room. Marcus gathered his papers slowly. "What happens to me?" Richard asked. Marcus looked at him. The question sounded smaller than Richard had ever sounded. "That depends on the investigators. You could make it easier." "I could." Richard waited. Marcus closed his folder. "But I won't." Richard's eyes hardened with a familiar bitterness. So this is who you really are. Marcus paused at the door. No, Richard. This is who I had to become after men like you kept mistaking mercy for permission. Downstairs, employees had gathered in the lobby. Not officially. No announcement had been made. But news moves through buildings faster than email when people are afraid their lives are about to change. Marcus stood before them, the same lobby where he had once been humiliated, and for a moment he saw the younger version of himself standing near the entrance with a laptop bag over his shoulder and his whole life breaking open in public. He wished he could tell that man something, not that it would stop hurting, not that justice would come quickly, not that love would not fail him. Only this: do not let their blindness become your mirror. Marcus stepped forward. I know many of you are scared, he said. I would be too. You've been through unstable leadership, public scrutiny, and uncertainty about your jobs. I'm not here to punish employees for the failures of executives. If you did honest work here, there is a place for you in what comes next. People listened without moving. But things will change, credit will be documented, concerns will be heard. No one in this company will be called difficult for telling the truth about a broken system. No one will have their work erased because someone more powerful finds it convenient, and no one will be asked to make themselves smaller so leadership can feel taller. His voice remained steady, but something in the room shifted. A woman near the back wiped her eyes. A young engineer Marcus did not know stood straighter. The same security guard from 5 years earlier, older now, watched him with quiet pride. Marcus looked around the lobby at the marble and glass and faces and felt no triumph. Triumph was too loud for what this was. What he felt was completion. Not perfect, not painless, but real. 6 months later, the company had a new name, Hale Response Technologies. The old executive floor became an open engineering and client operations center. Richard's private office became a training room. Marcus did not do that out of pettiness, though Diane laughed for a full minute when he told her. He did it because rooms built for one man's ego could be put to better use, teaching people how systems worked. The public correction ran in 3 major industry outlets. It did not undo what had been done, but it placed the truth somewhere permanent enough to be found. North Star expanded its partnership with Marcus's company nationwide. Hospitals that had once hesitated now signed because the platform did what Marcus promised it would do. Elaine Porter sent him a handwritten note after the first major emergency deployment under the new system. It worked beautifully, she wrote. More importantly, it worked honestly. Claire wrote once, a letter, not an email. Marcus read it on a Sunday morning with coffee cooling beside him. She apologized without asking for anything. She said she had started therapy. She said she was learning the difference between being attracted to strength and standing beside someone when strength became costly. She said Richard had left her when the lawsuits began because men like him loved loyalty only when it benefited them. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. He did not reply. Some chapters deserve acknowledgement without reopening. 1 year after the acquisition, Marcus brought his mother and father to the company anniversary event. Samuel Hale moved slowly with a cane, but he refused a wheelchair because pride and stubbornness had always been cousins in him. Evelyn wore a navy dress and kept looking around as if the building itself might disappear if she blinked too long. Marcus guided them through the lobby, now warmer, brighter, filled with employees and families and clients who greeted him not as a symbol, not as an exception, but as the man whose work had earned the room. Near the elevators, Samuel stopped. This where it happened? Marcus looked at him. Where what happened? His father gave him a look. Don't play with me, boy. This where they tried to shame you? Marcus glanced across the lobby. The memory was still there, but it no longer owned the space. Yes, he said. Right here. Samuel nodded slowly. Good. Marcus smiled faintly. Good? His father tapped his cane once against the marble. A place that saw you humiliated got to see you return whole. That's not revenge. That's testimony. Marcus looked at his father, then at his mother, then at the people filling the lobby with noise and life. For years, he had thought justice would feel like proving Richard wrong, but standing there, he understood that Richard had become almost irrelevant to the final meaning of the story. Justice was not Richard losing the company. Justice was Marcus refusing to lose himself. Justice was every overlooked person in that building knowing that erasure was not the end of a life. Justice was his mother standing under lights she once cleaned in other buildings, watching her son own the room without asking permission. That evening, Marcus stood on the small stage in the lobby to give a speech. He looked at the crowd and did not use notes. "A few years ago," he said, "I left this building carrying a cardboard box. Some people believed that was the end of my story here. For a while, I wondered if they were right. When people underestimate you long enough, part of the battle is making sure you don't start helping them do it." The room was quiet. I have learned that prejudice is not always loud. Sometimes it wears a suit, sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it says you're impressive while making sure you never get the title. Sometimes it calls your pain anger and your confidence arrogance. Sometimes it takes what you built and then acts surprised when you ask for your name to be attached to it. Marcus paused. His eyes moved across the room, landing briefly on young engineers, older employees, nurses from client hospitals, his parents near the front. But I have also learned this: what is true does not stop being true because someone powerful denies it. What you build does not stop being yours because someone steals credit. And who you are does not shrink because someone else needed you small. Evelyn wiped her face. Samuel looked straight ahead, jaw tight, proud beyond words. Marcus continued, "This company will not be perfect. No company is. But it will be honest about what it values. We will value the people who do the work. We will listen when something is wrong. We will not confuse silence with professionalism. And we will never again build success on someone else's erasure." Applause rose slowly at first, then stronger, filling the lobby until it reached the marble walls and glass ceiling and seemed to return from every direction. Marcus stood in the sound, not above it but inside it. And for the first time in years, he let himself feel the full distance between the man who had been left and the man who had returned. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the building had quieted, Marcus walked alone through the lobby. The cleaning crew moved in the distance. The city lights reflected in the glass. He stopped near the place where Claire had once stood beside Richard in her cream coat, where Richard had warned him to be careful, where the old life had broken so loudly he thought the sound would never leave him. He stood there for a while, hands in his pockets, breathing evenly. Then he smiled. Not because every wound had vanished. Some wounds become part of the architecture, but because he had built something strong enough around them that they no longer decided the shape of his future. The next morning, a young black intern named Jordan arrived early for his first day. He wore a suit slightly too big in the shoulders and carried himself with the nervous precision of someone trying not to make any mistakes. Marcus saw him waiting near reception and recognized the posture immediately. The carefulness, the calculation, the exhausting awareness of being watched before being known. Marcus walked over and extended his hand. "Jordan?" The young man straightened quickly. "Yes, sir. Mr. Hale?" "Marcus is fine." Jordan shook his hand, trying to hide how much the moment meant. "I just wanted to say, sir, I read about what happened. What you built. It's why I applied." Marcus studied him for a moment. "Then I'm glad you're here." Jordan hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you keep going when they tried to make everyone believe you were the problem?" Marcus looked across the lobby, then back at the young man. He thought about giving a polished answer, something easy to remember. But Jordan did not need polish. He needed truth. "At first," Marcus said, "I didn't keep going well. I was angry, I was hurt, I doubted myself. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of that part. Pain is not weakness. But eventually I realized something. They were not trying to prove I had no value. They were trying to make sure I never understood how much value I had." Jordan listened carefully. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder, not heavily, not as ownership, but as reassurance. "So I stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding me. I built proof instead." Jordan nodded slowly. Build proof, he repeated. And build yourself, Marcus said. The proof matters, but you matter more. The elevator doors opened. Marcus stepped aside and gestured for Jordan to enter first. The young man smiled, a little surprised by the courtesy, and walked in. Marcus followed. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of the lobby where his life had once fallen apart and had later been remade. He did not feel bitterness. He did not feel the need to look backward any longer than memory required. The building rose around him, carrying him upward, and this time Marcus Hale was not entering someone else's room hoping to belong. He owned the company, yes. But more than that, he owned his name, his work, his story, and the peace no one had been able to steal from him. And years after his wife left him for his boss, Marcus finally understood that losing people who were ashamed of him had not been the tragedy. The tragedy would have been staying small enough to keep them comfortable. He had not stayed small. He had risen, not perfectly, not painlessly, but fully. And when the elevator opened onto the top floor, Marcus stepped out into the morning light of a company rebuilt on truth, carrying no cardboard box, asking no permission, and leaving behind every voice that had ever told him he did not belong.